The polyester of the rented tuxedo felt like a cage, too tight across the shoulders and slick with a faint, chemical odor I couldn't ignore. Every part of me felt borrowed, out of place. Wedding receptions, I've decided, are a special kind of purgatory for the perpetually single. They are loud, shimmering showcases of a life I only seem to observe from a distance, like a biologist studying a foreign species through thick glass. My world was one of screaming alarms, the acrid bite of smoke, the structured chaos of the firehouse, and the profound, echoing silence that followed me home to my empty apartment. Here, surrounded by my sister Sarah's beaming friends and our sprawling, boisterous family, the silence in my own life felt amplified into a roar. I was a firefighter, a captain no less. I managed teams, made split-second decisions with lives on the line, and could carry 180 pounds of dead weight down a ladder. But I couldn't navigate a conversation with my Aunt Carol about her new hydrangeas to save my life. My little sister was getting married. Sarah, who I'd taught to ride a bike and patched up after she fell, was now a vision in white, laughing into her new husband's eyes. A deep, genuine happiness swelled in my chest for her, but it was immediately followed by a familiar, hollow ache. The DJ was playing some upbeat, forgettable pop song, and the dance floor was a writhing mass of joy. I was leaning against the bar, nursing a lukewarm club soda, trying to look thoughtfully occupied. It wasn't working. My cousin Mark, his tie already loosened and a sheen of sweat on his forehead, clapped me hard on the back. Still flying solo, eh, Cap? Thought for sure Sarah's wedding would be the one. You can't just rescue cats from trees forever. He laughed, a loud, wheezing sound. I gave him a tight smile, the one I reserved for civilians at accident scenes. Before I could form a non-committal reply, Aunt Carol appeared at his elbow, her smile as sharp as her meticulously manicured nails. "Mark, leave him be," she said, though her eyes told a different story. "Michael has his career. It's a very demanding life. It doesn't leave much room for anyone else." She patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a diagnosis. "Don't you worry, dear. Your time will come." Mark snorted into his drink. "Or it won't. Some guys are just lone wolves. He'll probably die alone, surrounded by a mountain of commendations." The words, meant as a clumsy, drunken joke, landed like a physical blow. "You'll die alone." It was the secret, terrifying whisper that haunted the quiet hours of my life, the fear that lived in the empty passenger seat of my truck and the other side of my king-sized bed. It was the reason I took extra shifts, the reason my apartment was so Spartan, the reason I kept everyone at a safe, professional distance. To hear it spoken aloud, so casually, in a room bursting with love and connection, was like having a spotlight thrown on the darkest corner of my soul. I felt the air leave my lungs. I muttered something about needing some air and pushed away from the bar, the laughter of my relatives following me like a judgment. The perfectly manicured lawn of the venue stretched out before me, dotted with fairy lights that twinkled like distant, mocking stars. I walked until the music was just a muffled thump against the cool night air. The tuxedo felt even tighter now, a straitjacket of forced celebration. I stood there, under the vast, indifferent sky, and felt a loneliness so profound it was almost a physical presence, a cold hand gripping my heart. Mark's words echoed and echoed. "You'll die alone." For the first time in a long time, in the quiet darkness of my sister's perfect day, I believed it. I must have stood there for 20 minutes, maybe more, letting the night chill seep into my bones. I was watching the party from the outside again, a ghost at the feast. The silhouette of my sister dancing with our father, the bright flashes of a photographer's camera, the bursts of laughter carried on the breeze. It was all part of a world I couldn't seem to access. My life was a series of emergencies, punctuated by silence. I was good at the emergency part, the saving, the doing, the commanding. It was the silence I was failing at. The silence was where the doubt lived, where the ghosts of the people I couldn't save whispered, where the fear of a future spent only with those ghosts grew into a monster. I was considering just slipping away, driving the 2 hours back to the city without saying my goodbyes, when a soft voice beside me made me jump. "It's a beautiful night, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne, and her smile was hesitant. In the dim light, I could see she was one of the bridesmaids, her dress a soft sage green. I didn't recognize her. I guess so, I mumbled, my voice rough. She took a step closer, extending one of the glasses to me. I saw you leave. Looked like you needed an escape. Or a rescue. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Sorry, bad joke. I took the glass, my fingers brushing hers. Thanks. We stood in silence for a moment, sipping the champagne. It was better than the club soda. I'm Clara, by the way, she said. I was Sarah's roommate in college. Michael, I said. I'm the brother. I know, she replied, her gaze steady. The firefighter. My posture stiffened slightly. It was the label that always preceded me, the one that defined me in every social situation. It was a shield, but a heavy one. Yeah, that's me. I thought it was you, she said, her voice dropping a little. I wasn't sure. You're not covered in soot and wearing about 80 pounds of gear. She looked down at her glass, then back at me. There was something in her eyes, an intensity that made me uneasy. Excuse me, I know this is a completely insane question for a wedding, but were you working a 5-alarm on the corner of Ashby and 3rd about 3 years ago? An old apartment building, brick facade. It was in November, right before Thanksgiving. The details clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Ashby and 3rd. The memory was sharp, visceral. The taste of smoke, the blistering heat that pressed in from all sides, the groan of weakening timbers. It was a nasty one. We'd lost the building entirely. I was there, I said slowly, my mind scrolling back through the chaos of that night. My crew was first on the scene. Her breath hitched, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. She turned her body more fully toward me, and in the soft glow from the reception hall, I saw it. A faint, silvery scar that traced the line of her jaw on the left side, disappearing into her hairline. A burn scar. My blood ran cold. I remembered, not her face, not specifically. In the thick, blinding smoke, faces are just shapes, sources of sound, desperate hands. But I remembered the room. Top floor, back corner. The fire was roaring up the stairwell, cutting off the escape. We were doing a final sweep, about to pull out, when my partner heard something. Faint coughing. We broke down the door. The heat was immense. I found a shape on the floor, a young woman, unconscious from the smoke. I remember throwing her over my shoulder in a fireman's carry, the feel of her dead weight, the desperate race back through the hallway as the ceiling began to sag. I remember passing her off to the paramedics outside and never looking back, because we had to go back in. That was you? She whispered, and her voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. You were the one who carried me out.
He stared at her, speechless.
Of all the calls, all the faces that blur into one another over the years, here was one of them, standing in front of me at my sister's wedding, holding a glass of champagne. The world tilted on its axis. I started, but no words came. What do you say to something like that? It was my job. It was a Tuesday. For her, it was the day her life almost ended. I never saw your face, she continued, her eyes glistening now. All I remember was the mask, and your voice yelling, "Got one," to your partner. And then the feeling of being lifted, of cold, fresh air hitting my face. The paramedic told me later that if it had been another 2 minutes, he just shook his head. She took a shaky breath and laughed, a watery, incredible sound. And here you are, Sarah's brother. She's been my best friend for a decade, and I never knew who to thank. The words "you'll die alone" felt like a foolish, childish phantom in my head. They were a projection of my own fear, but they had no substance. Here, standing in front of me, was the living, breathing substance of my life's work. It wasn't a commendation in a frame. It was a woman in a sage green dress who was here, alive, celebrating my sister's happiness, because of me. A wave of something hot and powerful washed over me, pushing back the cold loneliness that had settled in my heart. It was a feeling I couldn't name. It was more than pride, deeper than satisfaction. It was connection, a profound, invisible thread that stretched from a burning room 3 years ago to this quiet lawn on a perfect summer night. You don't have to thank me, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. I was just doing my job. No, she said, shaking her head, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. It's never just a job. You gave me everything. You gave me today. You gave me the chance to see my best friend get married. You gave me the life I have now. After the fire, everything changed. I stopped wasting time. I finished my degree, I traveled, I fell in love. It was like I was given a second chance, and I swore I wouldn't squander it. She looked at me, her eyes boring into mine. But it all started with you, a stranger in the dark. My decision was instant, born not of logic or training, but of the raw, overwhelming empathy that her story awoke in me. My own self-pity felt pathetic, insignificant. I reached out not as a firefighter, not as a captain, but as Michael, and gently placed my hand on her arm. Tell me about it, I said, my voice soft. Tell me about the life you built. And she did. Standing there under the stars, with the muffled sounds of the party as our backdrop, Clara told me her story. She told me about the months of recovery, the fear of falling asleep, the way she rebuilt her life not from the ashes, but from the foundation of a second chance. She spoke of her fiancé, a man she met a year after the fire, and the small graphic design business she'd started from her kitchen table. Her voice was full of a vibrant, hard-won joy. I listened, completely captivated. For me, the story of that night had ended when the flames were out and the report was filed. I had closed the book, but she had taken that ending and turned it into the first chapter of a whole new story. The victim I had carried out of the smoke was gone, replaced by the strong, radiant woman who saw her life as a gift. The mockery from my relatives, the crushing weight of my own solitude, it all just dissolved. It became background noise. The reality was this conversation, this incredible, impossible connection. My job wasn't a wall that separated me from the world. It was a bridge. I just had never dared to cross it, to see what was on the other side. When she finished speaking, a comfortable silence settled between us. The empty champagne glasses hung loosely in our hands. What about you, Michael? She asked gently. What's your story? When you're not running into burning buildings? For the first time, I didn't give the stock answer about being busy with work. I didn't deflect. I looked at this woman whose life was so deeply intertwined with my own. A woman I had met only an hour before, and I told her the truth. I told her about the quiet apartment, about the feeling of being an outsider at my own family's celebrations, about the fear that my job had consumed the man I was supposed to become. I told her about Mark's comment. As I spoke the words, "You'll die alone," they sounded different, robbed of their power. They weren't a prophecy anymore. They were just a clumsy, thoughtless sentence. Clara didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at me with an empathy so profound it felt like a physical warmth. No one who creates the chances you do could ever be truly alone, she said softly. You're a part of my story, a part of my happiness. You're a part of every good day I've had for the last 3 years. You just didn't know it. We walked back toward the reception together. The music was louder now, the lights brighter, but it didn't feel alienating anymore. It felt like a celebration, and for the first time that night, I felt like I was a part of it. I saw my sister on the dance floor and my heart didn't ache with loneliness. It swelled with love. I saw my relatives and I didn't feel their judgment. I felt a distant, detached pity for their shallow understanding of a meaningful life. The crisis hadn't been a fire or a collapsing building. The crisis had been inside me. A slow burn of isolation that had finally been extinguished by a single, unexpected human connection. The rest of the night passed in a warm, pleasant blur. Clara introduced me to her fiancé, a kind man with a quick smile who shook my hand with a gratitude that needed no words. We danced. I, who never danced, actually danced. It was a clumsy, awkward shuffle, but Clara laughed and I laughed with her. Felt easy. Felt right. Later, as the party was winding down, I stood alone for a moment by the smoldering fire pit outside. The tuxedo felt comfortable now, like it finally fit. The silence that settled around me wasn't empty. It was peaceful, filled with the echoes of conversation and laughter. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was Sarah's brother. I was a firefighter. And I was the man who had carried Clara out of a fire. All of those things were true, but they no longer felt like separate, conflicting identities. They were all just parts of me. Driving home in the pre-dawn light, I thought about the thousands of calls I've been on. The car crashes, the medical aids, the fires. To me, they were incidents logged and categorized. But for the people involved, they were the day their lives changed. I had been a silent, anonymous actor in countless stories, never staying for the next scene. That night, I finally got to read a chapter from a book I didn't even know I had helped write. Back in my apartment, the familiar silence greeted me, but it had lost its edge. It wasn't the sound of loneliness anymore. It was just quiet. I took off the tuxedo, hanging it carefully on the back of my door, and stood in my living room, looking at the city lights twinkling through the window. For years, I had defined myself by the risks I took and the discipline I maintained. I thought strength was about being self-sufficient, about being the lone wolf who could handle anything. But I was wrong. True strength, I was beginning to understand, was in the connections we forge, in the unforeseen ripples our actions create in the lives of others. My life wasn't a collection of commendations in a frame. It was a vast, invisible network of stories, of second chances, of grateful handshakes and bright futures I had, in some small way, made possible. I was not alone. I had never been. I was surrounded by the lives I had touched, a silent guardian in a city of stories, and for the first time, I finally felt like I was home.